Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear listener, there are warriors in history who are remembered for a single victory, and then there are those whose entire lives become legends. Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu was not just a commander, he was a force, a man whose name carried weight on the battlefield, a strategist whose presence alone could shift the outcome of war, an opponent that armies feared before the fight even began. He was known for something rare. He did not lose. Battle after battle, he stood firm, army after army. He overcame. Situation after situation, he found a way. Contrast chaos with control. War is unpredictable, plans fail, conditions change, even the strongest leaders face defeat. But Khalid radiallahu anhu seemed different. He adapted, he calculated, he moved with precision. And because of that, he became something more than a soldier. He became a legend. But here is where the story becomes unexpected. Because despite a life filled with battles, despite standing at the front lines again and again, despite facing death more times than most could count, he did not die in battle. Pause and reflect on that. A man who spent his life surrounded by swords did not fall by one. A man who led charges into danger did not meet his end on the battlefield. Instead, he died in his bed, quietly, away from war, away from the clash of armies. Contrast expectation with reality. You would expect a warrior like him to fall in battle, to be remembered for a final stand, to die with a sword in his hand. But that did not happen. And that contrast is what makes his story powerful. Because when Khalid radiallahu anhu was nearing the end of his life, he said something that revealed everything. He looked at his body, and he said, "There is no spot on my body except that it has a scar from a sword, a spear, or an arrow." Then he said, "Yet here I am, dying on my bed like a camel." These words are not weak, they are reflections. Because in that moment, he understood something deeper. Victory is not always what we expect, and death does not always come the way we imagine. But what made Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu truly al-azim was not just how he fought, it was how he lived and how he faced death. Without fear, because for him, the battlefield was never the goal. There was something greater, something that made even death feel small. But to understand that, we must go back to a time when Khalid radiallahu anhu was not a Muslim, back to a time when he stood on the opposite side, because before he became the sword of Allah, he was once an enemy of Islam, and that transformation is where the real story begins. Before he became known as the sword of Allah, before his name was spoken with honor among Muslims, Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu stood on the other side. He was not just an opponent, he was one of the strongest enemies of Islam. Born into the powerful tribe of Quraysh, Khalid radiallahu anhu grew up in an environment shaped by leadership, strategy, and pride. His family held influence, his upbringing sharpened his mind, and from an early age, he understood war. Not just fighting, but strategy, movement, timing, positioning. He saw battle not as chaos, but as a system, and he mastered it. Contrast ordinary fighters with true commanders. Many can fight, few can lead. But Khalid radiallahu anhu had something different, the ability to read the battlefield like a map. And this became clear in one of the most critical moments in early Islamic history, the Battle of Uhud. At that time, Khalid radiallahu anhu had not accepted Islam. He stood with Quraysh against the Muslims, and in that battle, he did something that changed everything. The Muslim army had gained the upper hand. Victory seemed near. The enemy was retreating. But then something happened. A group of archers who had been given strict instructions by the Prophet ﷺ to remain in position left their posts. Just for a moment, just for opportunity, and Khalid radiallahu anhu saw it. Contrast oversight with awareness. Where others saw victory, he saw vulnerability. He moved quickly, decisively. He led a cavalry attack from behind, unexpectedly, precise, devastating. And in that moment, the entire battle shifted. What seemed like victory turned into confusion. Loss replaced control, and the Muslims faced one of their most difficult moments. This was Khalid radiallahu anhu, not just a fighter, but a strategist who could turn the tide of war. But here is what makes this story powerful. Despite his strength, despite his intelligence, despite his victories, he was still on the wrong side. Contrast skill with direction. A person can have ability, but without truth, that ability can be used against what is right. Khalid radiallahu anhu had everything: strength, leadership, reputation. But he had not yet found the truth. And that is what makes his story different, because his greatness did not begin when he was winning battles. It began when he recognized the truth and changed, because there would come a moment when the same man who stood against Islam would stand for it, not halfway, not slowly, but completely. And when that happened, the battlefield would never be the same again, because the strength that once opposed Islam would now defend it. And that transformation would turn a powerful enemy into one of the greatest defenders of the faith. There comes a moment in some lives when everything changes, not gradually, not slowly, but completely. For Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu, that moment came after years of standing against Islam. He had seen battles, he had faced Muslims, he had fought against the very message he would one day carry, but something began to shift, not on the battlefield, but within. Contrast external strength with internal realization. A person can appear confident on the outside, yet inside, questions begin to grow. Khalid radiallahu anhu had witnessed something unusual. The Muslims were not like other armies. They were not driven by power. They were not controlled by fear. They carried something different: conviction. Even in loss, they remained firm. Even in difficulty, they did not break. And this stayed with him. Because a strategist does not only observe movement, he observes meaning. And what he saw did not match what he expected. This was not ordinary. This was not just another group fighting for control. There was something deeper. And slowly, that realization grew until it reached a point where it could not be ignored. Khalid radiallahu anhu made a decision. He would go to Medina, not as an enemy, but as someone searching. And when he arrived, he met the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This moment is powerful, because everything Khalid radiallahu anhu had been, everything he had done, everything he had stood for, now stood in front of the one he had opposed. And what happened next was not rejection, not anger, not retaliation. The Prophet ﷺ welcomed him with calmness, with openness, because Islam does not close doors, it opens them. Contrast human reaction with prophetic character. Many people would reject someone who had fought against them, but the Prophet ﷺ saw something else. He saw potential, he saw sincerity, he saw a heart ready to change. And Khalid radiallahu anhu spoke. He expressed what had been building inside him: recognition, clarity, acceptance. Then he declared his shahada. At that moment, everything changed. His past did not disappear, but it was transformed. Because Islam does not erase strength, it redirects it. The same courage, now for the truth. The same strategy, now for guidance. The same leadership, now for Islam. Contrast loss with gain. Khalid radiallahu anhu did not lose anything by accepting Islam. He gained direction, and that direction would soon be recognized, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not just accept him, he honored him. He saw what Khalid radiallahu anhu could become. And not long after, he gave him a title a title that would define his legacy forever, a title that would echo through history, Saifullah, the sword of Allah. And once that title was given, the battlefield would never be the same again. After accepting Islam, Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu did not remain in the background. He moved forward, quickly, decisively. Because when a person of strength finds truth, that strength does not stay silent, it becomes active. And for Khalid radiallahu anhu, that moment came in one of the most critical battles in early Islam, the Battle of Mu'tah. This was not a small encounter, it was a confrontation between a relatively small Muslim force and a much larger, well-equipped army. The odds were overwhelming. The Muslim army had 3 appointed commanders, Zayd ibn Haritha radiallahu anhu, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, and Abdullah ibn Rawaha radiallahu anhu. One after another, they fell. The al-Qiyadat, leadership, was gone. The army stood in a moment of crisis. Confusion spread. The situation became unstable. And this is where Khalid radiallahu anhu stepped forward, not by assignment, not by prior plan, but by necessity. Contrast chaos with leadership. When structure breaks, true leaders emerge. Khalid radiallahu anhu took control. He assessed the situation instantly. This was not a battle that could be won through direct confrontation. The numbers were against them, the conditions were against them. But retreat, in that moment, required skill, because retreat without strategy becomes defeat, and defeat could mean destruction. Khalid radiallahu anhu did something remarkable. He reorganized the army, he changed positions, he created the illusion of reinforcements, he managed movement in a way that confused the enemy, and through that, he saved the army, not by victory in the traditional sense, but by preserving lives. Contrast winning with surviving. Sometimes the greatest success is not defeating the enemy, but escaping destruction. And that is exactly what he did. When news of the battle reached Medina, the Prophet ﷺ spoke about it. He described what had happened. He mentioned the fall of the commanders. And then he said something that would change Khalid's identity forever. He said, "Then the banner was taken by a sword from the swords of Allah, and Allah granted them victory." From that moment, Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu was known as Saifullah, the sword of Allah. Pause and reflect on that title, not given by people, not earned through self-praise, but given by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that makes it different. Contrast titles given by nas, people, with titles given by truth. People give titles based on fame, but this title was given based on purpose. Khalid radiallahu anhu was no longer just a warrior. He was a tool, a means, a sword, in the service of Allah. And that changed everything, because a sword does not act on its own. It is guided, directed, used for a purpose. And from that moment on, every battle Khalid radiallahu anhu entered was no longer about personal victory. It was about something greater, the defense of Islam, the establishment of truth. And this is why his fear disappeared, because when a person understands their role clearly, death no longer feels like loss. It feels like part of the path, and Khalid radiallahu anhu would walk that path through battle after battle, without hesitation, without fear, because he was no longer fighting for himself. He was fighting as the sword of Allah. After he became Saifullah, the life of Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu did not slow down. It intensified. Battle after battle, campaign after campaign, front line after front line. He was always there, not behind the army, not observing from a distance, but leading at the front. Contrast ordinary soldiers with true commanders. Many commands from safety, few lead from danger. Khalid radiallahu anhu was always where the risk was highest, and that is what made him different. He did not send others forward. He went first, From the deserts of Arabia to the lands of Persia and the borders of Rome, his presence became known. Armies recognized his name, enemies studied his movement, soldiers followed his command with trust. Because wherever Khalid radiallahu anhu went, something changed. Battles that seemed impossible became possible. Situations that looked like defeat turned into control, not through luck, but through strategy. He understood the terrain. He understood the timing. He understood how to use speed, surprise, and movement. Contrast force with intelligence. Some rely on numbers, others rely on thinking. Khalid radiallahu anhu combined both, but his strength was his mind. And yet, despite all of this, despite his victories, despite his reputation, he lived with a constant awareness: death. He did not avoid it. He walked toward it, again and again. Think about that. How many times did he stand where arrows were falling? How many times did he charge where swords were raised? How many times did he enter battles where survival was uncertain? Countless. And over time, his body carried the record of that life. Scars, from swords, from spears, from arrows, every mark a reminder, every wound a story. Contrast comfort with sacrifice. Some live protected lives. Others live in constant exposure to danger. Khalid radiallahu anhu chose the path of sacrifice because for him, this life was not about comfort. It was about purpose. And that purpose removed fear, because when a person understands why they are doing something, the fear of consequence becomes smaller. Khalid radiallahu anhu did not measure his life by how long he would live. He measured it by what he would do. And that mindset changes everything. Contrast fear of death with acceptance of it. Most people fear death because they are attached to life. But Khalid radiallahu anhu saw death differently, not as an end, but as a possibility that could come at any moment. And because of that, he was ready, always. He did not wait for the right time. He did not hold back for safety. He moved forward fully, and this is what makes his story powerful. Because he lived a life where death was always close, yet fear was not. But then, after all the battles, after all the danger, after all the moments where death could have come, something unexpected happened. The end did not come in war. It came somewhere else, in a way that no one would expect, even him. After a life spent on the battlefield, after years of leading armies, facing danger, and walking into situations where death was always near, the moment finally came. But not in the way anyone expected. There was no army in front of him, no battlefield, no sound of swords or horses, just silence. Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu was not in war. He was at home, lying down, weak from illness. Contrast expectation with reality. A man who lived surrounded by battle, now facing death in stillness. No final charge, no last strike, no dramatic ending. Just a quiet room and his final moments. This is where his words become powerful. Because in that state, he looked at his body, a body that had carried him through countless battles, and he said, "There is no spot on my body except that it has a mark from a sword, a spear, or an arrow." Pause and imagine that. Every part of him had faced danger. Every part had been exposed to death. And yet, he continued, "Yet here I am, dying on my bed like a camel." These words are not frustration, they are reflections, because he understood something deeper at that moment. Contrast control with reality. He had controlled battlefields, he had a controlled strategy, he had controlled movement, but death was never in his control. It did not come when he expected. It did not come where he expected. It came when Allah decreed. And that is the point. Because no matter how strong a person is, no matter how skilled, no matter how fearless, the moment of death is written, not by us, but by Allah. Khalid radiallahu anhu had spent his life ready to die in battle, but Allah chose something else, a different ending, and that ending carries a lesson. Because from a human perspective, it feels unexpected, even unfair, a warrior not dying as a martyr in battle, but from the perspective of wisdom, it reveals something powerful. Victory is not defined by how you die, it is defined by how you live. Contrast external image with internal reality. People may expect a dramatic ending, but Allah looks at sincerity, intention, and action. Khalid radiallahu anhu lived a life of sacrifice, a life of courage, a life of complete commitment, and that is what mattered. Not the scene of his death, but the meaning of his life. And even in that moment, there was no fear, no panic, no regret about the battles he fought. Because his mindset was different. He had already faced death countless times, and now, facing it in stillness, did not change who he was. Because the courage he carried was not tied to the battlefield. It was tied to his faith. And that is what made him strong, even at the end. But this raises a deeper question. How can someone face death so many times and not fear it? What removes that fear? Because that is where the real lesson lies. Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu faced death more times than most people could imagine. On battlefields where survival was uncertain, in moments where one khutwat, step, could mean life or death. Yet, he did not fear it, not because he did not understand danger, but because he understood something deeper. His mindset was different. Contrast how people usually think about death. Most people avoid it, they fear it, they push it out of their minds, because they see it as a loss, the end of everything. But Khalid radiallahu anhu did not see death that way. He saw it as a transition, a meeting, a moment that would come, no matter what. And once that understanding settles in the heart, fear begins to fade. Because fear often comes from uncertainty. But when a person is certain about what comes next, that fear loses its grip. Khalid radiallahu anhu believed in Allah, not just in words, but in certainty. He knew that life in this world was temporary. He knew that the next life was real. He knew that every action carried weight. And that knowledge changes how a person lives. Contrast attachment with purpose. When a person is attached to this world, they fear losing it. But when a person lives for something greater, this world becomes a path, not a destination. That is how Khalid radiallahu anhu lived. He did not fight for fame. He did not lead for recognition. He fought because he believed. He moved because he trusted. And that belief gave him something powerful: clarity. Because when your purpose is clear, hesitation disappears. He knew why he was on the battlefield. He knew what he was willing to sacrifice. And once those questions are answered, fear becomes smaller. Contrast hesitation with conviction. Hesitation comes when a person is unsure. Conviction comes when a person knows. Khalid radiallahu anhu knew, and that is why he could move forward, again and again, without fear. But there is something else, something even deeper. He did not see himself as the source of victory. He saw himself as a means, a tool, a sword, and that is important. Because when a person thinks they control outcomes, they feel pressure. But when they understand that Allah is in control, that pressure disappears. Khalid radiallahu anhu did his part. He planned, he acted, he led, but the result was always with Allah. And that removes fear. Because success is not in your hands. Failure is not in your hands. Your responsibility is action, and that mindset creates freedom. Freedom from anxiety, freedom from overthinking, freedom from fear. because you are no longer carrying the weight of the outcome. You are only carrying the weight of effort, and Khalid radiallahu anhu carried that perfectly, which is why, even when death came, not on the battlefield, but in his home, his heart did not change, because the courage he had was never about the sword. It was about certainty. And that is the difference between someone who appears brave and someone who truly is. Because true courage is not the absence of danger, it is the absence of fear. When the heart is connected to Allah, when people hear the name Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu, they think of battles, strategy, victory, strength, a man who moved through war like it was second nature. But if that is all we see, we miss the real story. Because the greatest victory of Khalid radiallahu anhu was not on the battlefield. It was beyond it. Contrast what people remember with what truly matters. People remember victories, they remember battles, tactics and outcomes. But Allah looks at something deeper, intention, sincerity, purpose. And this is where Khalid radiallahu anhu becomes truly remarkable, because his life was not about proving himself. It was about serving something greater. He was once an enemy of Islam and became one of its strongest defenders. He was once fighting against truth and then gave his entire life to protect it. That transformation alone is a victory greater than any battle. Contrast external success with internal change. Winning a war is powerful, but changing yourself, aligning with truth, leaving behind pride and ego, that is greater. And Khalid radiallahu anhu did both. He mastered the battlefield, but more importantly, he mastered himself. He did not let pride control him. He did not let success distract him. He did not let his title define him. Even though he was called Saifullah, the sword of Allah, he remained humble, because he understood something important. A sword does not act on its own. It is used, directed, guided, and that is how he saw himself, not as the source of victory, but as a means. And that perspective changes everything, because when a person sees themselves as a servant, they do not become arrogant. They become focused on doing what is right, focused on fulfilling their role, focused on pleasing Allah. Contrast legacy with reality. People measure legacy by what is seen, but the true legacy of Khalid radiallahu anhu is not just in battles won, it is in the example he left behind. A man who lived with purpose, a man who acted with conviction, a man who faced death without fear. And that is something that goes beyond history. Because not everyone will stand on a battlefield, not everyone will lead armies, but everyone will face moments of fear, moments of uncertainty, moments where they must choose between hesitation and action. And in those moments, the story of Khalid radiallahu anhu becomes relevant, because it reminds us, courage is not about war. It is about faith. It is about knowing who you are and why you are here. It is about moving forward, even when the outcome is unknown, because the real battlefield is not always outside. Sometimes it is within, and those who win that battle are the ones who truly succeed. Because in the end, the greatest victory is not defeating others. It is aligning yourself completely with the truth. Khalid ibn Al-Walid radiallahu anhu spent his life walking toward danger, yet he did not fear it. Not because he was unaware of death, but because he understood it. Contrast how most people live. We avoid risk, we delay action, we hold back, waiting for certainty. But certainty never comes, and that is the difference. Khalid radiallahu anhu did not wait for the perfect moment. He moved with purpose. He lived knowing that death could come at any time, so he focused on how he lived, not how he would die. And that is the real lesson. You may never stand on a battlefield, But you will face fear, you will face hesitation, you will face moments where you must choose. So ask yourself, if your time came today, would you be ready, like him?